Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. And as you can probably tell, um, our instructor this evening is not Debbie Weaver, who had to cancel due to some health reasons. But our instructor this evening is Robin Worthland. So Robin is a professional genealogist who specializes in DNA. She has a BS in molecular biology from BYU, a certificate in genealogy research from Boston University, and she presented at RootsTech 2020, Healing and Family History, the Emotional Side of DNA. Really well qualified, and I love Family Locket. They're a fantastic website, researchers and so forth, and she's a vital part of that group as well. And then I also found out an added bonus that Robin and I are related. How cool is that? And she's the one that pointed me out. We have the same third or fourth great grandfather on the Taylor side. So that is really cool. Anyway, in just a bit, we'll turn the time over to Robin. Just to remind you, this is being recorded. You'll be able to watch a recording of the class in a few days when it's posted to the website, the Sandy Granite Family History Center. And please mute, and we'll have you we'll have a Q&A session at the end for about 10 minutes or so. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Robin. Thank you.
Okay, so you can see my screen right now, right? Okay, fantastic. Well, I am so happy to be here. This is a great opportunity. I know Debbie Weaver, and she's fantastic, and she will do well for you in another presentation. So tonight I'm going to talk about how DNA can help you gather the missing branches of your family tree. And we sometimes wonder how can a DNA test help me or you find our ancestors? Well, DNA can help us because the DNA tests give us a list of people who we share DNA with. And it can help you find family members who are deceased or living or recently deceased. And you might be seeking to identify unknown parents or siblings, aunts or uncles or more distant relatives. And the DNA tests help us to identify cousins or siblings or parents. But the real value in using DNA tests to find your ancestors are these cousins that you'll see on your DNA match list. You know, we might know our first or second or third cousins, but just like Bob and I discovered the other day that my fourth great grandparents are his third great grandparents. You know, we didn't know each other before, but now it's great because we can have a connection there. And so some really neat things are that our family, the relatives of your DNA match list might have more family history stories or other records or photos from your ancestors that you didn't inherit and you don't have. And then you can collaborate with those newly found relatives to find ancestors and discover them that are beyond the end of the family line. You know, we often call that a brick wall. And so the family trees that are connected to some DNA results may have ancestors that live more distant in time than those at the end of your different family lines. And then those relatives' family trees might give clues about records to search to verify additional generations of ancestors. And all of these things can help you add branches onto your family tree. So I'd like to play a short video. I love this. It's from the University of Utah, and it's from their Genetic Science Learning Center called Learn.Genetics. And this is a great explanation of DNA inheritance. And it gives an overview about how we receive DNA from our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents.
When living things reproduce, they pass DNA to their offspring. Through asexual reproduction, some living things, like bacteria, can reproduce without a partner. Offspring made this way are genetically identical to the parent. Other living things, like people, reproduce with a partner. This is called sexual reproduction. Offspring made this way inherit equal amounts of DNA from two parents. Each of us has two copies of every gene. The two copies may be the same or they may be different. The combined output from all of our genes influences our inherited traits. When two biological parents make a child, each parent passes down one copy of each of their genes. For each gene, which copy is passed along is random, and it may be different for each child. Each child gets a unique combination of copies of all of their parents' genes. This mixing contributes to genetic variation. Because they share genes, children resemble their parents and each other. But unique gene combinations give each individual a unique set of inherited characteristics. Looking farther back in the family tree, the parents' DNA came from their parents. So the children also share DNA with their biological grandparents, but the amount they share with each grandparent is only half as much as they share with each parent. Looking back to the great-grandparents, the children share DNA with all of them, but only half again as much. This inheritance pattern explains why you have more genes in common with closer relatives like your mom than you do with more distant relatives like your great-grandmother. In this way, your DNA holds a record of our family relationships.
So the type of DNA that was highlighted in the video was autosomal DNA. And sometimes we might wonder, do we share DNA with every single extended family member? And the answer is no. You do share autosomal DNA with many of your close and distant cousins. And DNA is inherited randomly, but it's in a kind of a generalized, predictable amount that you can, that's been observed many, many times throughout all of the population. And so some good statistics have been calculated out of the data that's been gathered. So this chart right here shows that, let's see. This chart right here gives the percentage chance that you are likely to share DNA with a certain level of cousin. So you're going to share 100%. That you have 100% of chance of sharing DNA with your first cousins, and your second cousins is darn near 100%. But then with your third cousins, it starts to kind of drop off, and fourth cousins is even less of a chance, and fifth cousins even less, and sixth cousins. So it's possible that Bob and I don't share any DNA, but we just might, because we are in that third cousin once removed range. So the other thing that is really interesting is that our ethnicity estimates are based on autosomal DNA. So there are three types of DNA, as you probably know. The Y chromosome is passed from fathers to sons down through the generations. And the paternal ancestor up here at the top passes down his DNA just to his sons, and then they pass it on to just their sons. So like this one right here didn't pass it on to his daughter, and so they didn't receive it. Autosomal DNA tests are the ones that are really widely advertised, and they might be the type of test that you've heard of the most. And so the autosomal DNA inheritance in this chart is shown by the red outlines on the different boxes and circles. And the ancestral couple at the top passes down their DNA through their bloodlines. And then they, in the chart, well, you can see how that is going down through each of the generations. And autosomal DNA is helpful in identifying ancestors back about 4 to 6 generations. The farther back you go, the less DNA you share with these ancestors have passed down to you. But you can still work together, use the data together and make a proof argument and prove your ancestral connection. And then mitochondrial DNA, that's passed from mothers to their children. So women can pass it on to their sons and their daughters, but only daughters can pass it on to their children, as you see here. And with Y-DNA, also, it can help you to identify surnames, and it can help you to see farther back than autosomal DNA can. And then mitochondrial DNA, it helps you can identify your matrilineal ancestors, and it can help you discern between two women that may or may, you're trying to figure out which one of these people was the mother of my ancestors. So it can help you to discern that. So the main DNA testing companies are MyHeritage DNA, Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, Living DNA, and Family Tree DNA. And they report the ethnicity estimates that they calculate based on their reference populations, and that might give you clues about your heritage and some communities in which your ancestors might have lived. So here are some examples of DNA match lists from Family Tree DNA and Ancestry DNA. And in the match list, you can see that, I've covered up the names, but it'll give you a name of DNA matches. It gives you an estimated relationship that you share with this relative based on the amount of DNA that you share. So, and DNA is measured in centimorgans. And so here, this person.
These images of DNA match
Whoa,
lists from
hold on. Okay, so, okay, now here's an example of MyHeritage and Living DNA. And they also tell the amount of shared DNA, the number of DNA segments that you share, and how long the largest segment is. And over here, they tell you how much DNA is shared in percentages and in centimorgans. So here is an example of 23andMe. And here you get the DNA matches name, the estimated relationship. Because I had identified which relatives, I had indicated which ones came on my dad's side and my mom's side, it is adding them. It adds that here so I can tell easily if it was on my mom's side or my dad's side. So if you're looking at for mitochondrial DNA, this is what a DNA match list might look like. Family Tree DNA is the only company that does mitochondrial DNA testing for the full sequence of your DNA. 23andMe also gives an estimated mitochondrial DNA haplogroup, but the more precise one comes from Family Tree DNA. So you get a DNA match list. It tells you the genetic distance, or how many mutations there are between you and the next person. It gives you a mitochondrial DNA haplogroup, and it tells the earliest known ancestor for some of the people. Something's happening with this and it's switching without me touching anything. Okay, so Y-DNA also is tested at Family Tree DNA. And once again, 23andMe does give a haplogroup estimate, but the precise haplogroup that you have is given by Family Tree DNA. There's something funny going on here. Okay, so it tells you the genetic distance, or how many differences or mutations there are between the markers that you share with other people, the other DNA matches, the earliest known ancestor, and the Y-DNA haplogroup. Okay, and then once you saw that there is an amount of centimorgans that it gives, you can use the Shared Centimorgan Project 4.0 tool that is found at dnapainter.com. You can enter that amount of DNA that you share with this relative that you may or may not know. And then it will calculate the probable relationships that you share with someone. You can share, DNA is so randomly inherited that you may not be able to tell exactly which relationship you share with a person. And so this helps you give you an idea of the estimate of which relationship it might be. So after entering 365, then it highlighted these boxes with the relationships that I might possibly share with an individual DNA match.
These images illustrate
Oh
the
my
concept.
goodness.
At the bottom of each
Hang on.
triangle, one corner
I'll just
represents
let this
you,
tell you.
and the other corner represents a DNA match. The top of the triangle represents the ancestor or the ancestral follicle that both you and your DNA match share. During exploration of the relationship shared with a DNA match, you are seeking to identify the most recent common ancestor, or the ancestor shared between you and a DNA match that lived closest in time to now. In this example on the left, 2 third cousins are the same number of generations from their common ancestors, who are their second great-grandparents. On the right, the common ancestor is 3 generations away from the DNA tester, and their DNA match is 4 generations away from the common ancestor. Their relationship is second cousins once removed. There are relationship charts online that can help you better understand the meaning of relationship terms and show the grandparent level for 2 cousins.
So you can, after you get that information, then you can compare the family trees of your DNA matches and yourself, and to see how you are related. So the idea is that you look at the family trees and you look for ancestors that you and your DNA match may have in common. Sometimes they're highlighted in different companies, and other times you have to figure it out. So here's an example where these were people in these family who had posted these family trees on Ancestry were descended from 2 different brothers. You can see the two, the most recent common ancestor was Barnard H. Greenwood and Eunice Fuller Howd. And then these 2 would be brothers because they both share the same most recent common ancestor. And these are also ancestors that are shared, but they aren't the ones who lived most recently in time to now. And so what if there's no family tree that you see there, or the family tree is private? Well, you can send a message to the other DNA match. Usually there is a messaging system within each of the DNA companies. And so, right here, as it shows, there was no family tree, and that they haven't built a searchable family tree. And so I could write to this DNA match and get through to them, or hopefully they would answer. Sometimes people don't, but you can try at least. And it could possibly be a shortcut to an introduction and even a possible friendship. So after that, you can build a new family tree, or you can add to your existing family tree. So right here on the left is a program that I really like called Lucidchart. And it's a way that you can build a tree and see it just 2-dimensionally. And I usually just include the DNA matches and then the common ancestors that we share. So with this situation, with this particular Lucidchart, we'd be looking for who is the unknown father of Matilda Haynes. And so I want to gather up all the DNA matches who are descended from this unknown father and Margaret Samuels, and try to figure out who that unknown father was. And then you can build a tree in Ancestry.com, and you can add new people to it. And as you connect with new DNA matches and see new family trees and find records that substantiate those relationships, you can build your own family tree. So this is a chart that I made that shows an overview of DNA tools, and kind of gives a direction on what steps you should go through as you're doing a DNA research project. So usually we start by utilizing tools from the left side. such as ethnicity estimates can give you a clue about your ethnicity, you know, what DNA you inherited that may have come from ancestors that lived in a certain area of the world. And then next, we create genetic networks, and those help us to see who shares DNA matches with each other. And those DNA matches will cluster along your family lines. Like you'll have some groups that will be from your father's side and some groups from your mother's side. And then you can narrow it down even farther so that then you'll find your paternal grandmother, paternal grandfather, maternal grandmother, maternal grandfather, and even farther down, even more generations back. Some other tools that you can use, I'll talk about a little bit more about DNA testing company tools, the LEADS method, auto clusters, and the Shared Centimorgan project. And then we compare family trees and build the charts and trees. And if that hasn't worked yet to solidify and verify a connection that you have between you and you and your ancestors, then you can move on to segment triangulation and look at the DNA segments that you and your DNA matches share. And there are other tools out there that can help you see who shares those exact segments. And the idea is that you would share a common ancestor with the people with whom you share an exact DNA segment. You can visualize your DNA segments by using chromosome mapping and use visual phasing and deductive chromosome mapping to continue on with your project and map your chromosomes. So one really important thing to remember is that DNA must be used in combination with family relationships and genealogical records. It's meaningless. It's just a list of letters if you don't use it in conjunction with records. So you want to look for historical records to connect yourself to your ancestors. And you try to find as many as you can that link your children to parents and then to grandparents and on back through the generations. And through your DNA match list, you might find those relatives who have photos or documents or memories that can help you identify ancestors that are farther down the line. And you might find relatives who were separated by war or immigration or other separation circumstances. You might even find relatives who can remember locations where your ancestors lived in the old country. And FamilySearch.org is a great free website that you can use to find records about your ancestors.
Brick walls can be found in every family tree. These are situations where family relationships have been lost or forgotten from the collective family's memory. Brick walls can be bridged through DNA research. Your relatives in your DNA match list may know more about your shared ancestors than you do, and their family tree may show generations beyond what you know about your family and the research that you've done and the ancestors that you or your family members have already discovered. Another bonus is that you can work together to research and discover more about your family history. If you like color, this is the slide for you. DNA segments can be shown on a chromosome map. DNApainter.com makes it easy to see the DNA segments we inherited from specific ancestors or ancestral couples. In this chromosome map, I've identified DNA segments that I received from the ancestors shown. The map isn't completely filled in, and I can continue to research my DNA to identify additional ancestors. As you research, you can learn who else shares specific DNA segments and connect to learn what those DNA matches know about your shared ancestors.
So how can DNA help you find your ancestors? Well, it can help you to confirm prior research and identify ancestors that both you and your DNA matches share. And you can learn or share genealogy and family history information that you know or that your DNA match knows. So the process is you take your DNA information, combine it with genealogical records, and then it's used as evidence to give proof of relationships. So here is an example of using DNA to help identify relationships and identify DNA matches. This actually is my cousin Gary, who I helped identify his biological father, and he has given me information or permission to use his information and examples. So first of all, I clicked on Gary Robertson's name in my DNA match list. And then it brought me to this page, and it showed, that he had a family tree, or he actually built the family tree, but it shows some possible shared ancestors. I can click on this right here, expand tree, to open up the tree. And another thing that I can do is I can click on shared matches and see who else Gary and I share DNA with. And when you do that, you can mark those groups of people that are in that shared matches list. So you can click on add or edit groups, and then choose a color, and then label it, and then it will show up over here on the side and show you, so you can quickly at a glance see which side of the family or which group do these people belong to. And then there's a great blog article, the Leeds method, using the colored ancestry dots, that's done by Dana Leeds at danaleeds.com. So here's a little bit more of an example of creating a custom group, and you can see how they're on the side here. And it just, once again, it helps you to quickly figure out how your DNA matches fit into your family tree. So something that you can do that I showed a little earlier is that you can chart your DNA matches. And some of the tools that you can use are Lucidchart or an ancestry tree, use your genealogy software, or use paper and pen, or even Post-it notes and put them on the wall. And then you focus in on the family line that you want to explore, and you set a research objective. So here is that other chart that I had showed you. I love to put the name of the DNA match, and this is all, this is anonymous here. I put the amount of DNA that I share with the match, and put who the base person, who everybody is, their DNA is being compared to, in the center, so that then I can see how it goes out from there. And then revisit the records and find additional records. So you probably know that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have free access to records on Ancestry.com, MyHeritage.com, FindMyPast.com, American Ancestors, which is the New England Historical and Genealogical Society, and Philae and Jenny Annette. And we know that not all the records that we find are online, right? So, I mean, the Family History Library does have amazing records, and you can access a lot through your local family history centers too. And then you may need to do some on-site research with courthouses, churches, historical societies, historical archives. Sometimes universities have donated collections, and you need to travel to that library at the university. And another hot tip is to get some help on Facebook from genealogy groups that are specific to what you are researching. So I use the Shared Sen and Morgan Project all the time. DNA Facebook pages can help us learn more, and also DNA blog posts help us learn. And you can, I have a blog series on FamilyLocket.com. It's about how to research like a pro with DNA. And it goes through it gives more in-depth explanations of how to use some DNA tools and go through the method of using DNA in your family history research. So I have a friend named Brent, who I have done some research for, and his big hot tip was DNA, do not avoid, because it can help you make some great breakthroughs. So Brent really wanted to know more about his family history, but he is so busy. And he knew some limited information, but just only back a few generations. So he tested his DNA, and then we learned that some of his cousins had family trees, which gave us hints about ancestors. And then we looked for records to confirm the connections, and Brent's tree grew new branches. So we were trying to, what we found was that in his family tree, it was missing this branch and all the way back. So that was what we used as the research objective to find. We wanted to find Jesse Carolyn Campbell's parents. So we looked in family tree and looked at the records that might have been available there. And the objective was, who are the parents of Jesse Carolyn Campbell, who was born 24th of August, 1888 in Bentonville, Benton County, Arkansas, and died on the 17th of October, 1971 in Carnegie, Caddo, Oklahoma. Well, I found a marriage record, and I actually attached this here, but before, so I was searching for any records about Charles Richard Thornton and Jesse Carolyn Campbell that would help give me clues and help me to plant their feet on the ground somewhere so that I could look around that area for additional records. And here was the marriage record that I found. I was looking for Jesse's parents, and sometimes the marriage records state, or a marriage license application states who the parents are. So we find Charlie Thornton and Jesse Campbell, and they were married on the 9th of September, 1904 in Grayson County, Texas. But unfortunately, there was no information about Jesse's parents. But we could tell that there she was in Texas in 1904. So we could look for the 1910 census and then also go back and try to find some records about her birth. Well, I didn't find anything. So I started looking in the DNA matches. So this is a page that opens up with DNA matches. You get to it by clicking on DNA at the top of the Ancestry DNA screen and view all the DNA matches, and then look at shared matches to try to learn more. So you click on a match that you want to learn more about and explore how much DNA you share with them and what the possible relationships are. And like I said, examining your shared relatives can help narrow down the family lines to help you find the lineage that you and your DNA match share. So a tool that was really helpful in this research was Throughlines from Ancestry. Throughlines is based on the family trees that users have submitted in Ancestry. And it also is correlated with DNA data. So when we looked at the through lines for Jesse Carolyn Campbell, I found that there was a second cousin who had also taken a DNA test. And this second cousin had posted a family tree. And that was really helpful to get me back to Jesse Campbell. So this family tree, when I clicked on this particular DNA match, we opened up and he had this family tree that had Jesse Carolyn Campbell in it. And you can expand the tree to see more. And you can also click on the individual to find out more about what that DNA match has found about that ancestor. So what I found was that this DNA match actually knew who Jesse Carolyn Campbell's mother was, Sarah Wallace. And they had attached all of these records here to their family tree that pertained to Jesse Carolyn Campbell. So these gave me great hints on other places to look and other records to find. Then I clicked on Sarah E. Wallace's page. And I learned a little bit more. And then I started looking for people who also had Jesse Carolyn Wallace in, we had Jesse Carolyn Campbell, right? And then a clue that her mom was Sarah Wallace. So was Wallace maiden name or a married name. It was hard to tell. So I looked around for Jessie Carolyn Carolyn Campbell in other family trees, also knowing that Wallace was her possible maiden name. And I came across Jessie Carolyn Wallace, who had the same birth date, the same death date, the same location in someone else's tree. So I started looking into the facts, or what they presented here as facts, and got this clue that John Wallace was her dad and Sarah Elizabeth Betty Holmes was her mom. So I looked on Find a Grave and found this grave for Sarah Elizabeth Betty Holmes Wallace, and her Wallace was her married name. And Find a Grave gives some other information. Some other people have linked other memorials to this. And I got some more clues out of the Find a Grave record about Sarah's spouse, John Wallace, and her parents. And this one said her mother was Nancy Carolyn Dysart. So it gave me clues about where I could look, or what I could look for in other records. And then it just kept going on. So I had Sarah Elizabeth Holmes Wallace, and then I found her father, Joseph Holmes, and her mother. And so that research objective was met. Of course, I needed to find other records like marriage records, birth, and church records, and census records that helped to substantiate the identity of Jessie Carolyn Campbell's parents. And it turns out that Jessie Carolyn Campbell was her married name, was from a previous marriage. It wasn't Campbell. So I really needed the DNA matches to help give me clues about where to look and what to look for, because other DNA matches knew that she had a different, her original name was Wallace. Okay, so that was a good example from Ancestry. And then there are other companies, and I just want to give you some good ideas about how to look at the shared matches from the other DNA companies. So we talked about family tree DNA and the mitochondrial DNA. And so all of these people here are shared matches. They share the same mitochondrial DNA haplogroup, and actually the whole full sequence of DNA, since they are, well, actually, this one is just for the coding regions and the hypervariable region 1 and hypervariable region 2. But I can see that there's no genetic distance, or zero genetic distance. So I can start looking for Lerner Birch, and trying to find these people and see if I have a common ancestor from there. And then same with Y-DNA. These, the last names of the earliest known ancestor can give clues about what a surname might be. And if there was an unexpected father back in the family tree, then that might be listed. He might be listed also. Okay, so with family tree DNA, they also do autosomal DNA testing. So when you open up your homepage, there is a place here and it says matches. And when you click on that, it gives you a list of the people you share DNA with. In family tree DNA, it also gives you this list, and you can see who else you share DNA with. So I chose to look at Ruth, and down you can click on here to see more DNA details and what DNA segments you share on which chromosomes. And then if you go all the way down, you can see other people that share DNA with you or with me and Ruth. So on MyHeritage, you click on the DNA tab up here and get a drop-down menu and you click on DNA matches, and then something like this will open up that shows you the people that you share DNA with. So remember that you calculate possible relationships by entering the amount of DNA that you share with a DNA match, and then it will give you an estimate of the relationships that you possibly share. Here's a chart, a Leeds method chart that helps you to separate your DNA matches into your paternal, maternal, grandparents, and grandfathers and grandmothers. And this is a great method, especially if you really are unsure how to get started. This method can help you start making initial DNA, separate your DNA. So one really exciting thing is that there is a company, an app. It's called DNA2Tree, and it's used for iOS systems, for iPhones or iPads. And this DNA2Tree can automate the separating of DNA matches. And it will give you a cluster. So all these people, so here's a list of DNA matches up at the top and down the side. And you know, it's the same person here on line 1 as it is here on line 1. But this makes a design structure matrix, and it brings people together who share DNA with the DNA tester and with each other. So all the people here in this red group, they share DNA, and some of the common ancestors names from the family tree are listed down below. And sometimes there are gray squares out here. It means that the people here could belong to the red cluster, or they could belong to this green and blue cluster down here. But it's a great quick way. I mean, in half an hour, you can get all of your DNA matches separated out. They tell you if you have a family tree, you can click on the name and it will tell you if they're the pathway to the common ancestor, if they have a family tree and the common ancestor is identified. And it's a great way to help you focus in on a family line and see which DNA matches to look at that might have a family tree that may go beyond the information that you know. MyHeritage has an auto cluster tool that will do the same thing, separate DNA matches into groups that share DNA with you and with each other. And then it also gives you this output, this spreadsheet that tells you how much DNA you share, the largest segment, the number of segments, how many people you share in common with, and how many people are on their family tree. Then you can click on that and go straight to their family tree. This is really a fabulous thing. So some other third-party websites that have DNA tools are the following. GEDmatch.com. It's a third-party tool for DNA analysis. It is a public database, so you have to read their terms and conditions and look at that very carefully. But it's a great translator website so that you can see things. You know, people can take their raw DNA results and upload to GEDmatch, and then you can compare them from 23andMe or Ancestry, Family Tree DNA. It's kind of a translator website. And it will give you can see, again, you can email for a DNA match, the amount of DNA shared, how many generations it is back to the common ancestor. And they have a lot of great tools on GEDmatch that you can visualize chromosomes with and see, you know, how much DNA you share and where you share it. So here's an example of a 64 centimorgan DNA match. So if you can figure out who your common, you know, if you can compare your family trees or be in contact with this person, then you can say, okay, this segment on chromosome 1 came from these shared ancestors. Genetic Affairs is another company that does auto clusters for 23andMe and family tree DNA. And it also has automatic tree building programs, and it's really neat. 23andMe has a unique way of building a family tree that is based only on your DNA matches. And so it doesn't use family tree information. It just figures out how much DNA you share with the person, and then it gives suggestions. You can edit the tree because it doesn't always turn out to show up in the exact right place. That, you know, maybe your cousin isn't connected to the correct branch, but you can edit that. DNA Painter is another fabulous website. You can import a family tree with a GEDCOM file. You can use tools to calculate what the odds are that a person is an ancestor, and you can map your chromosomes. And it gives a list of the tools that you share that they have here. And one really cool thing is that you can import a tree or build a tree, and then you can indicate which ancestors you have verified with DNA. And so they are your biological relatives. And here's a little example of a what are the odds tree. And you can add in the DNA matches, add in people, and then go back to the common ancestor, and it will calculate where a DNA match could fit into the family tree and the odds of that, or the probabilities. And then you can see a chromosome map like I showed earlier, and you can see which DNA segments you share with other cousins that were inherited from certain ancestors. So once again, why use DNA? Because it can help you confirm your prior research. It can identify ancestors that both you and your DNA matches share. You can learn or share genealogy and family history information that you know or that your DNA matches know. And then you can add missing branches or ancestors to your family tree. Here is some of my contact information. I'd love to hear from you. Please email me or see the website at familylocket.com for more information and ideas and guidelines, specifics on how to use DNA in your family history research. Okay. So that's all that's it for the presentation tonight. And thank you so much for the opportunity. And are there any questions?